Now, for you to qualify to make an all-NBA team, you got to play at least 65 games. If you want to qualify to be an MVP, you got to make 65 games. You got to play 65 games. If you want to be a defensive player of the year, or all those other awards, you have to play at least 65 games. And now, for the players that were still making these lists without playing up to these games, now if you don't play at least 65 games, it could potentially affect your earning. Because as you guys know, these Supermax contracts, some of them stipulate that you need to play, you need to be in the NBA for a certain time, you need to be with your particular team for a certain time. But also, if you make some of these lists like all NBA team, or if you win the Defensive Player of the Year award, if you win the MVP award, but if you're no longer playing at least up to the 65 game threshold, you can no longer be eligible for this. So not only are you not going to be able to participate in any of these awards, but also you're also now possibly going to be losing out on some of the money that you can make if you're selected for some of these awards. So that's a pretty big one. I think this particular provision was also put in place to combat load management, which had totally run rampant. And it was pretty much happening all throughout the league. And you can have players like Kawhi Leonard and these guys load managing. So many teams were doing it. And I think essentially what this new CBA is saying, earn your salary. Wow, what a novel idea, right? Never heard of it. Another one is now I think for the all NBA team is now positionless. So now they're picking the 5 best players to make the first team and the second team. I think that's a new change that is being implemented. Now, what I want to do is I want to read a little bit about the cap, because the cap is probably the most complicated part of this entire thing. And I'm sure this is why they have lawyers that actually go through this information. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm a lawyer in any way, shape, or form. If we have some lawyers watching this show that follow this show, maybe you guys can explain a little bit better to us in the comment section. So I want to read a little bit from an article that we got here from ESPN. And it basically says, NBA salary cap projections show greater increases, sources say. The NBA informed teams Wednesday that it has updated the salary cap projections for the 2023-2024 season, sources confirmed to ESPN. In a memo sent to teams, the league said the salary cap is projected to be $136 million and the luxury tax is projected to be $165 million, higher by $2 million and $3 million respectively. That initial projection sent in September before the season began. The league stressed that both numbers are still projections and that the final figures won't be determined until the NBA's annual financial audit is completed later this month before the new league year begins on June 30th. Under the new collective bargaining agreement with the National Basketball Association, which goes into effect starting next season, the salary cap can rise a maximum of 10% per season, with the 2022-2023 salary cap being set at $125 million. The maximum cap and the total tax could be for the 2023-2024 campaign will be $136 and $165 respectively. Now, if you read those numbers, or if you listen to that, I'm sure some of you will be like, Shaggy, what? Basically, I think it's time that we try to break this thing down. And I'm going to break it down to the best of my knowledge. Again, I am not a lawyer. I don't read contracts like this normally. So this is why they have lawyers to interpret all of this jargon here. So let's just get into it now. So the current salary cap going into next season, at the very least, let's keep it simple, is going to be $126 million, meaning teams can spend up to $126 million on salaries, right? If you spend below that number or at that line, you're fine. You've achieved the cap. The cap will then go up by 10% each year. Why is the cap going up by 10%? Because if the cap goes up, you're raising the ceiling and therefore people can earn more money. So essentially, theoretically, you could be earning in aggregate 10% more. 10% more, depending on how it all trickles out. So I ran some of the numbers, and this is what I was able to come up with. If every team, right, and this is obviously a hypothetical situation, but if every team spent to the cap, meaning to $136 million, they would spend roughly $4 billion. Now, some people wondering, where did you get $4 billion from? That's $136 million times the 30 teams is roughly $4.1 billion. So that's the spend that the teams are going to be spending. Now, in 2022, according to Statista, the league generated roughly $10 billion. We understood that. Now, I'm not sure how we account for that $6 billion, because when I read about the revenue split, I heard that the owners and the players split the revenue, which made it a little bit which convoluted the case, because then I'm like, okay, if they're splitting the revenue if they're splitting the revenue and players are assigned salaries, how do we account for this $6 billion? So I'm not 100% sure. Now, we also have to factor in the fact that the values of these teams are going to appreciate over time as well, right? So we also have to factor that in. And those increases in the values of these teams, I believe, is going directly in the pockets of the owners, as it should, right? If the team is becoming more valuable, I think the owner should be the one to bask in all of that, because they're the ones that invested and bought the team, right? So if you invested and bought the team, you paid the price, you enjoy the rewards, and I think the players are compensated quite nicely. If you want to experience some of that, what is it, the dividend in terms of the net growth of the team in terms of its value, then go buy your own team, and then all of a sudden, boom, you can do it. So now let's talk about a little bit about the luxury tax, right? The luxury tax will be set at 165. Some people are saying, but 165, I thought you just said it's 126. No, it's 126, right? That's the cap. Then they said the cap can go up by 10%. So the 10% of the 126 is the 10 million. So now it goes to what? 136. They're now saying that the luxury tax number can rise all the way up to 165. If a team exceeds that number, then the first apron will kick in, which I believe is $7 million, pushing your cap to a total of $172 million. The second apron will now kick in if you exceed that number, and the second apron is $17 million, and then now your cap will jump to about $182 million. Based on my understanding, and I can be wrong, let me just say this now, I can be wrong. If you know this information better than I, please say it in the comments section. But based on my understanding, I think the apron, or I'm viewing the apron as a tax. It is a tax. It is not a credit. It is a tax, right? Now, according to Statista, right? You guys can go look this up, because I wanted to understand, okay, wait. If the cap is at 136 million and you don't exceed the cap, I wanted to understand what's the average revenue an NBA team makes every single year. And based on what Statista.com had to say, it basically said in 2022, roughly, the average revenue of an NBA team was around $331 million. Now, if you know anything about business, or you read anything about business, or you listen to people talk about business, what do you want to do? How do you make money in business, right? What is it? Keep your expenses low, and you have to make more than your expenses, right? If you make right at your expenses, you broke even. You didn't really make anything, but you covered all your expenses. So you want to keep expenses low, keep profits high, boom, you make money.